The box hit the floor with a thud. And just like that, Maya Thompson's career at Innovate Solutions was over before it even started. "Pack your things," Regional Director Scott Brennan said, standing in the doorway of her cubicle. "You're done here." Maya looked up from her computer, where she'd been reviewing the company's Q3 financial reports. It was 10:47 a.m. on her first official day as a senior data analyst. She'd been at her desk for exactly 2 hours and 33 minutes.
"I'm sorry, what?" she said, genuinely confused.
"You heard me. Security will escort you out. HR will email you about your final paycheck." Scott's arms were crossed, his face set in that expression Maya had seen too many times before. The one that said she didn't belong here, never would belong here, and he was doing everyone a favor by getting rid of her now. "Can you tell me why?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to pump through her system. "You're not a culture fit," Scott said flatly. "I saw your resume. Howard University, worked your way up from nothing. Very inspiring, but this is an elite environment. We need people who understand how things work at this level. You're out of your depth." The 3 other people in her pod had gone completely silent. Maya could feel their eyes on her. One of them, a white guy named Trevor, was barely hiding his smirk. "I have a master's degree from MIT, Maya said quietly. "Published 2 papers on predictive analytics. 7 years of experience at Fortune 500 companies. My credentials are literally the same as everyone else on this floor. And yet here we are," Scott said. "Security's on their way up. Don't make this difficult." That's when Maya did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She laughed. Not a bitter laugh, or an angry one. A genuine, almost relieved laugh that made Scott's confident expression falter for just a second. "You know what?" she said, standing up and grabbing her bag. She didn't bother with the box, didn't touch the family photo she'd brought or the coffee mug that said "Data doesn't lie." Just picked up her bag and walked toward the elevator. "This is going to be a really interesting story to tell." Scott followed her, making sure she actually left. "There's nothing interesting about it. You weren't qualified, you couldn't handle the pressure, and now you're gone. That's the story." Maya pressed the elevator button and turned to face him. "Scott, can I ask you something? Did you actually read my file? Like, my complete employment file?" "I know everything I need to know," he said. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Maya stepped inside and turned around, and the smile on her face made Scott unconsciously take a step back. "See you in 2 weeks?" she said as the doors closed. Scott stood there for a moment, confused. Then he shook his head and went back to his office. Another problem solved. Another diversity hire. Who couldn't cut it. Gone before they could bring down the whole department. He'd done this 5 times in the past year, and nobody ever questioned him. Why would they? He was regional director. He had total hiring and firing authority over his division. He was untouchable. What Scott didn't know was that Maya Thompson wasn't just a senior data analyst. She was Maya Elizabeth Thompson, daughter of Jonathan Thompson, the founder of Innovate Solutions, who died 3 years ago, and left his entire 74% stake in the company to his only child. Maya had watched her father build this company from nothing, watched him die from a heart attack at 62 because the stress of running it alone had literally killed him, and then watched the board of directors try to buy her out for pennies on the dollar. She'd said no, kept her shares, stayed silent, and started working her way through the company from the bottom up under her mother's maiden name, Washington, to see exactly what was happening to her father's legacy. Now she knew. 2 weeks later, Scott Brennan walked into the emergency board meeting, feeling annoyed. These meetings were always a waste of time. Usually just the CEO and a bunch of shareholders arguing about quarterly projections and market positioning. But attendance was mandatory for department heads. So here he was, sitting in a leather chair in a conference room on the 47th floor, checking his phone while the board members filed in. "Gentlemen," CEO Richard Hargrove said, standing at the head of the table. "And lady," he added, nodding to the one female board member, Patricia Chen, "thank you for coming on short notice. We have a situation that needs to be addressed immediately." Scott barely looked up. Probably another merger discussion or some drama with investors. 3 weeks ago, Richard continued, I received a letter from our majority shareholder. The letter outlined several concerns about company culture, discriminatory practices, and violations of both federal employment law and our own stated corporate values. That got Scott's attention. He put his phone down. The majority shareholder has requested a full investigation into the regional sales and analytics division, specifically into the hiring and firing practices of one Scott Brennan. Scott's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, what? The letter included documentation, Richard said, pulling out a folder that looked way too thick for Scott's comfort. Emails, termination records, demographic data showing a pattern of discrimination. 23 employees fired in the past 18 months. 21 of them were people of color. 19 were women. And apparently, not a single one of them was given proper performance reviews or documentation before termination. That's ridiculous, Scott said, his voice rising. Those people weren't qualified. I have full authority to make staffing decisions in my division. You have authority to make decisions in accordance with company policy and federal law. Patricia interrupted. Not to run your own personal discrimination operation. Who even made this complaint? Scott demanded. Show me who's accusing me, because this is clearly someone with an agenda. The door to the conference room opened. Maya Thompson walked in, wearing a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Scott's monthly car payment. She moved with the kind of quiet confidence that made everyone in the room sit up a little straighter. Scott's face went from red to white to a shade of green that suggested his breakfast was about to make a reappearance. Good morning, everyone, Maya said, taking the seat at the head of the table, right next to Richard. Thank you for gathering on short notice. I know these emergency meetings are disruptive, but given the circumstances, I felt it was necessary. She placed her briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out a stack of documents. For those who haven't met me in person, my name is Maya Elizabeth Thompson. I hold a 74% stake in Innovate Solutions, inherited from my father, Jonathan Thompson, the founder of this company, which makes me the majority shareholder, the primary decision maker, and the person who's been watching this company fall apart for the last 3 years, while I worked my way through various departments to understand why. The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system. Scott's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You were the analyst I fired 2 weeks ago. Maya Washington. Washington is my mother's maiden name, Maya said calmly. I used it when I applied because I wanted to see how employees were really being treated. Wanted to see if the culture my father built still existed, or if it had been corrupted by people who valued profit over people. She pulled out a document and slid it across the table to Scott. This is your termination letter. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out after this meeting. You'll receive 2 weeks severance, which is more than you gave any of the 23 people you illegally terminated. You can't do this, Scott said, his voice shaking now. I have contracts. I have rights. You have an at-will employment agreement, Maya said, not even looking at him. Same as everyone else. And given that we have documented evidence of discrimination, harassment, and creating a hostile work environment, I'd suggest you take the severance and go quietly, because if you want to fight this in court, I promise you, you will lose everything. Patricia Chen was openly smiling now. Richard looked like he couldn't decide whether to be relieved or terrified. But Scott's not the only problem, Maya continued, turning her attention to the rest of the board. He's a symptom. The disease is much bigger. This company has lost its way. We've prioritized revenue over innovation, shareholder returns over employee well-being, and we've created a culture where people like Scott can operate with impunity for years. She stood up, and suddenly the room felt smaller. So here's what's going to happen. Effective today, I'm implementing a company-wide audit. Every department, every manager, every policy. We're going to review hiring practices, compensation structures, promotion rates, and termination records. And anywhere we find patterns of discrimination, we're going to fix them. Maya, Richard said carefully, I understand you're upset, But this kind of overhaul could cost millions, could impact our quarterly projections. I don't care, Maya said, and her voice cut through the room like a blade. My father built this company because he believed technology could change the world. He believed in creating opportunities for people who'd been overlooked by everyone else. He hired based on talent, not pedigree. He promoted based on performance, not politics. And he would be ashamed of what this place has become. She turned back to Scott, who was now slumped in his chair, his career imploding in real time. You told me I wasn't a culture fit, Maya said. You were right. I don't fit into a culture of discrimination and mediocrity. So I'm going to change the culture. Then she pressed a button on the conference room phone. Security, please escort Mr. Brennan from the building. 2 security guards entered immediately. Scott stood on shaking legs, looking around the room for support that didn't come. Trevor from her old pod was sitting in the back as an observer, and his face had gone from smug to terrified because he knew exactly what was coming for him next. As Scott was let out, Maya sat back down and opened her laptop. Now, let's talk about rebuilding. Richard, I need you to put together a diversity task force by end of week. Patricia, I want you to head up the HR audit, and everyone else. I want recommendations on my desk by Friday for how we make this right. What about you? Richard asked. What role are you taking? Maya smiled. I'm taking the role my father should have given me years ago. I'm taking a seat on this board, and I'm making sure that every decision we make from this point forward honors what he built. This company was supposed to be different. It's time we remembered that. 6 months later, Innovate Solutions was unrecognizable. Scott Brennan was gone, along with 4 other managers who'd been running similar operations in their departments. Trevor and 6 others had been fired after the audit revealed a pattern of harassment and discrimination. The company had hired a new chief diversity officer, implemented blind resume reviews for all hiring, and created an employee advocacy program that actually had teeth. The stock price had taken a hit during the restructuring. Some investors complained. Some board members pushed back. But Maya held firm, because she owned 74% of the company, and they literally couldn't stop her. And then something interesting happened. The best talent started coming to them. People who'd been overlooked by other companies. Brilliant minds that had been passed over because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of culture fit started applying in droves. Innovation skyrocketed. 3 new patents filed in 6 months. Revenue actually increased because they were finally hiring the best people instead of just the people who looked like everyone else. Maya never did go back to that cubicle on the 23rd floor. She didn't need to. She'd learned everything she needed to know in those 2 hours and 33 minutes. But she did frame something and hang it in her new office. The termination letter Scott had planned to give her, marked returned to sender in red ink. Because sometimes the person they underestimate is exactly the person who changes everything. And sometimes justice doesn't just feel good. Sometimes it rebuilds entire companies. Scott Brennan, by the way, never worked in corporate America again. The story of his firing went viral in business circles, and his name became synonymous with exactly the kind of manager every company was trying to avoid. He tried to sue for wrongful termination. The case was thrown out in 2 weeks when Maya's legal team presented evidence that would have resulted in federal charges if they'd wanted to pursue them. The 23 people Scott had fired? Maya personally reached out to every single one of them, offered them their jobs back with back pay, promotions, and a personal apology. 19 of them accepted. The other 4 had moved on to better opportunities, but they appreciated the gesture. And that smirk Trevor had given her on her last day? Maya never forgot it. When his termination came during the audit, she made sure she was the one to deliver it personally, walked right up to his desk, handed him the letter, and said, "You're not a culture fit. See you never." Because real power isn't about humiliating people or throwing your weight around. Real power is about using your position to make sure nobody else gets treated the way you were treated. It's about changing systems, not just punishing individuals. Maya's father once told her that the best revenge is building something so good that people can't ignore it. She'd spent her whole life thinking that meant building a company. Turns out it meant rebuilding one. And every day when she walked into that office, past the portraits of her father in the lobby, she knew he'd be proud. Not because she'd fired Scott or saved the company, but because she'd remembered what it was supposed to stand for in the first place. That's the real story. Not about getting even. About making things right. And sometimes, that's even better.